Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we have our 50th deck. It's the 10 Commander Experiment. I'm very excited that we are almost to a year of putting out a video every single week. So if you haven't seen any of our previous videos, please do check them out. But what we're going to be doing, as per usual, is randomly selecting a card from Scryfall.com or working with a suggested card that someone in the community has suggested for us, working with a budget of $100 or less, and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So before we jump into the actual deck tech itself, I do want to highlight some of our social media accounts. If you're ever interested on sending us cards that you'd like to see turned into decks or suggestions for videos, you can always follow us on Twitter, Reddit, send us an email. I will respond to all of those, and I'm always happy to get suggestions on any of those accounts, as well as get some feedback for how things have been going. And if you're interested in supporting our content, you can use our TCG Player affiliate link that is in the description below. Any cards you buy from TCG Player, we get a little bit of support from them as well, just kind of for sending you their way. So if you're interested in any cards, please do use our link. I would appreciate it very much. And then finally, if you're interested in supporting us more directly, we do have a Patreon account where you can go over and support us. We've got different tiers where you can get various different forms of content, things like having access to a Discord, being able to play in some of the games for the channel, or at least having kind of first dibs on playing games for the channel. And then there's also the possibility to be sent a card that we use, one of our random cards, and all of that money right now is going toward buying equipment to help us get set up to record in-person Commander games as well as the digital games, because it is starting to move more of an in-person, and I'd like to be able to record some of those games for you guys as well. So please do support the content, and if that's not your style, you can always just like the video, subscribe to the channel. That does help out a lot as well, get our name out there a little bit. So thank you to everyone who is supporting, and I suppose with all that being said, it's time we jump into our 50th deck, which this week is a suggested card by Kitchen Table Games. I'm sorry, Kitchen Table Games. I'm not 100% sure where this deck was suggested. I can't remember if it was Reddit, Twitter, YouTube, something along those lines. But the suggested card is Signal the Clans, which is red and a green for an instant that says search your library for 3 creature cards and reveal them. If you reveal 3 cards with different names, choose one of them at random, put that card into your hand, and then shuffle the rest into your library. So Signal the Clans is super interesting, and I'll kind of explain what we're doing with it in a minute, and I'll give you a heads up. I mentioned that this is a bit of a special deck tech. It's not going to follow the same traditional theme that the rest of our deck techs have, and you'll see why in just a moment. But, of course, once we have our random card, we need to pick out a commander, or in this case, commanders, and we actually have a pair of partners. We have Tana the Bloodsower, which is 2 red-green for a 2/2 with trample. She's an elf druid. And whenever Tana the Bloodsower deals combat damage to a player, create that many 1/1 green sapperling creature tokens, and she has partner. And her partner is Ardenn, Intrepid Archeologist, 2 and a white for a 2/2 legendary creature core scout. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may attach any number of auras and equipment you control to target permanent or player, and again, partner. Now, you may be looking at this and thinking, but Zach, you mentioned that this is a 10 commander experiment. Obviously, it can't be a 10 commander experiment without 10 commanders. To which I would say you are 100% correct, and I will be a little bit honest. I cheated a little bit because Tana and Ardenn I'm counting as 1 commander because they're partners. But we also have a trio of mono-colored commanders, a trio of double-colored commanders, and a trio of 3-colored commanders. So not only do we have Tana and Ardenn, who are the official commanders of this deck, inside the deck we also have Mavinda, Student's Advocate, and I'm not going to go through and read all of these at the moment. We will get to that later, but I figured we'd take a look at the commanders themselves. So like I said, mono white, we have Mavinda. Mono red, we have Heartless Hidetsugu. For mono green, Varis Silvery Moon Ranger. For our Boros commander, we have Bruenor Battlehammer. Our Gruul commander is Gallia of the Endless Dance. Selesnya, we have Katilda, Dawnheart Prime. And then the final trio are all 3 colors. That's Jared Carthalion, True Heir. We have Marisi, Breaker of the Coil. And finally, we have Obuun, Moldaya Ancestor. So these are going to be the 10 commanders we are building around. And again, yes, I know, I can actually count. I know it's 11, but Tana and Ardenn count as 1 because they're partners. And so the main idea of what this deck is trying to do is we have our main 2 commanders, Tana and Ardenn, who are going to be built around 6 specific cards. Then we're able to take each of the other 10 commanders and build them around 5 cards. That means that each of our 5 cards works for that specific commander. It's designed as almost a mini commander deck. So including the commander, there are 6 cards in each. That leaves us 38 additional slots, all of which go toward lands. And the main focus for this, other than Tana and Ardenn, which we'll explain in a moment as well, is each of the 5 cards for our mini commanders has to have a spot for card draw, a spot for ramp, a spot for removal, a spot for an instant that is red or white that costs 4 mana or less, and some of you may be able to guess why. And then the last card that it has to have is anything that works well for that commander. So that's kind of like a freebie spot. We can throw in anything that works for that specific commander. But we're going to go through each of these 10 commanders, which might take us a little bit, so I do appreciate you coming along for the ride. And obviously, if we're going through each of the 10 of them, we got to start with the main pair, which is going to be Tana and Ardenn. So Tana and Ardenn are a little bit unique from the others because they're the main ones. We built the whole deck around this. And the 6 cards that fall under Tana and Ardenn are going to be Signal the Clans, of course, our random card. Soul Ring, which is just ramp, taps for 2 mana. Sunforger, which is the main focus of the rest of the deck. The reason that every other commander has to have a red or white instant that costs 4 mana or less is because of Sunforger. We want to be able to have a ton of targets in the deck for Sunforger. Then we also have Swords to Plowshares for removal, Boros Charm as protection, removal, and maybe even just, being able to one-shot people, give things double strike. And then finally we have Anger as a way to give haste. So Tana and Ardenn do not follow the same strict rules as the rest of them. They didn't specifically need card draw, ramp, removal, a random card, and a Sunforger tutor target. But this is the main package of the deck. Everything else follows that specific steps. So since Sunforger is the main piece of this, that's the main one we're going to read here. I'm not going to read every single card because there's going to be a lot of them and I don't want to take up, an hour of your time. But Sunforger is relevant because it's a 3-mana equipment and you can equip creature gets +4/+0, pay a red and a white, and unattach Sunforger and search your library for a red or white instant card with converted mana cost 4 or less and cast that card without paying its mana cost, then shuffle your library. And it also equips for 3. So any red or white instant spell that costs 4 or less can be cast for free from our deck. That gets us Signal the Clans. From Tana and Ardenn, that also gets us Swords to Plowshares, gets us Boros Charm. We want to build around that pretty heavily because Ardenn is going to allow us to equip for free every time we go to combat. And since we're equipping for free, we're able to get Signal the Clans, which is our main draw for this deck, and at least 1 card for every other one of our commanders. So we're going to run through each of these commanders in order. And like I said, I'm not going to read every single card. But it's important to see where all of these are coming from. So our first one is our mono white commander. That's going to be Mavinda. And Mavinda, Student's Advocate, 2 and a white for a legendary creature, Bird Advisor. She is a 2/3 with flying. And you can pay 0 and cast target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard this turn. If that spell doesn't target a creature you control, it costs 8 more to cast this way. If that spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. Activate only once each turn. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. Before we go to the next slide, I have a bit of a disclaimer. I completely misread Mavinda when I was putting this deck together, and I didn't realize that the targeting a creature was what made it cost 8 more. I assumed that it was going to be any instant or sorcery, and so I built Mavinda's piece of this deck around being instant and sorcery heavy, not knowing that they needed to target our thing. So there are definitely some improvements that could be made to this section of the deck, but there are also some very good includes as well. So the 5 cards that we're putting in our Mavinda section of this deck, for ramp, we have Marble Diamond. For card draw, we have Secret Rendezvous, which I know is a very controversial card. Not a lot of people like it, but I think it's pretty fun, getting to make friends, draw some cards. Our Sunforgeable instant is Settle the Wreckage for protection. Generous Gift being the removal. And then any random card that can go into Mavinda is Vanquish the Horde. And surprisingly, Vanquish the Horde is probably the only one of these that works very well with Mavinda, because it costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield. If we cast it, yes, Mavinda's going to make it cost 8 more out of the graveyard, but we can actually reduce that 8 as long as there are a ton of creatures on board. So if we ever get to the point where we're very desperate and need to cast this board wipe, Mavinda could still make it cost white from the graveyard. So Vanquish the Horde, still a very good board wipe. Unfortunately, doesn't target, and I know I kind of missed the mark on some of these because they don't target at all, but I do still think this is a pretty decent mono-white package for what we're trying to do. And the main goal for Mavinda, obviously, to do the things that mono-white does. Wipe the board, protect ourselves, maybe draw some cards. Going to try to do that at least. But that's Mavinda. Like I said, not going to take too much time. We'll move on to mono-red, which in this case is going to be Heartless Hidetsugu. And Heartless Hidetsugu is 3 red for a 4/3 Ogre Shaman, and can tap, and Heartless Hidetsugu deals damage to each player, that does include us, equal to half that player's life total rounded down. And Heartless Hidetsugu comes aided by 5 specific cards. We again have the diamond for the ramp, Fire Diamond. We have Thrill of Possibility for card draw, being able to discard a card, draw 2. Wild Ricochet for the Sunforgeable instant, again, protection, being able to choose new targets for an instant or sorcery. Chaos Warp for removal. And then the specific card to Heartless Hidetsugu is Gratuitous Violence, which is 2 red for an enchantment that says if a creature you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. Notably, Heartless Hidetsugu doesn't cause players to lose life, it causes them to take damage. So Gratuitous Violence means that we can tap Heartless Hidetsugu, and it deals double damage to every single player, which means that since it's doing damage equal to half their life total, it's now doing damage equal to their entire life total, rounded down. So provided we have an odd life total, we will survive. Anyone who has an odd life total survives because it gets rounded down to 1. Anyone who's at an even life total just dies outright. So Gratuitous Violence can be incredibly powerful with Heartless Hidetsugu, but it is important to make sure that we don't kill ourselves. So you probably want to make sure that you do this maybe after you've attacked, maybe be able to sneak in some damage on yourself as well. We have some ways to accomplish that, but not too many, unfortunately. But this is our little Hidetsugu package in the deck. This is our Hidetsugu commander deck, I suppose. And that leads us to our final mono-colored deck, which is mono-green, this time with Varis, Silvery Moon Ranger, who is 1 green for a 3/3 Human Elf Ranger, has Reach and Ward 1. Whenever you cast a creature or planeswalker spell, venture into the dungeon. This ability triggers only once each turn, and whenever you complete a dungeon, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token. So Varis wants us to venture into the dungeon, wants us to cast creatures. So our small Varis package here, we have again Moss Diamond for ramp. We have Beast Whisperer in terms of our card draw because again we want to cast creatures. Beast Whisperer is a creature that cares about casting creatures. I had to cheat a little bit when it came to our Sunforgeable instant. So since Sunforger can only get red and white spells, there was no mono green card that I could actually choose for this slot. So I did cheat and I put in a hybrid card, but because we're a Naya deck, it technically doesn't matter. Let me know in the comments if you think that should be allowed or not. I think it's okay, but who's to say? So for the Sunforgeable instant, we chose Guttural Response, which is a hybrid red-green, so it can be picked up by Sunforger. And it's an instant that just says counter target blue instant spell. So again, protection, in this case in the form of a counterspell, which is unique for Naya colors. We have Beast Within, which is our removal, and we have Eliwick Tumblestrum as the specific to Varis card. She's a planeswalker that cares about venturing into the dungeon. She actually ventures into the dungeon with her +1. And then her -7 gives us an emblem that gives all of our creatures +2/+2 for every single dungeon that we've gone through. I completely forgot about that, but it also gives them trample and haste, which means she's even better than I originally thought. So this is our small Varis package. Not too much to do with the dungeons because Eliwick was the only one that really fit that bill, but we tried to play into the creature aspect of it as well. So with mono green out of the way, that leads us to our first multicolored commander, and that is Bruenor Battlehammer for 2 red and a white for a 5/3 dwarf warrior. Each creature you control gets +2/+0 for each equipment attached to it, and you may pay 0 rather than pay the equipped cost of the first equip ability you activate each turn. So Bruenor's equip ability actually comes very handy when we're looking at Sunforger. We would love to be able to equip it every single turn for free to be able to use our mana for other things. And so our tiny Bruenor package of our 5 cards, for ramp we have Knight of the White Orchid, which puts a plains into our hand. We have Akiri Fearless Voyager, because Akiri cares about attacking with equipped creatures to draw cards, so we're able to kind of make use of Bruenor's equip ability there. Our Sunforgeable instant is Make a Stand, giving our creatures indestructible and +1/+0, kind of getting in for combat. And we have Argentum Armor as our removal, which is a little bit unique because it's not your typical piece of removal. It costs 6 to equip and 6 to cast, but we're able to use Argentum Armor as removal when we have Bruenor because Bruenor equips for free. So we can avoid that, equip 6, equip it to Bruenor, give him +6/+6, swing in, destroy any permanent on the battlefield, and if we can do that every single turn, it can kind of get out of hand very quickly. And then our last card on our Bruenor specific card is Open the Armory, 1 and a white for a sorcery. Search your library for an aura or equipment, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle your library. So just another way to get Sunforger or Argentum Armor if we already have Sunforger. So we don't run too many equipments, so it is important that we have ways to get the ones that we need. And again, particularly Sunforger, because that is kind of our namesake card outside of Signal the Clans, and we're building mostly around that. So got to make sure Bruenor, our equipment commander, can actually get an equipment. But that's Bruenor. Our second multicolored commander is Gallia of the Endless Dance, which is just a red and a green for a legendary creature, Satyr, 2/2 with haste. Other Satyrs you control get +1/+1 and have haste. And whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures, you may discard a card at random. If you do, draw 2 cards. So a bit of a Satyr commander, a bit of a discard commander. So we played into both of those effects with her 5 cards. In this case, we have Cultivate as our ramp card. We have Change of Fortune as our draw card, because since Gallia wants us to discard cards, we're able to discard our entire hand, then draw a card for each card we've discarded this turn, so we can kind of pump up those numbers a little bit and draw more cards than expected. Our Sunforgeable instant is Destructive Revelry, red and a green for an instant that destroys an artifact or enchantment. So not creature removal, not protection, but we do need artifact and enchantment removal in the deck. That is always important. Our removal piece is Irreverent Revelers, which also destroys an artifact, but it's also a satyr, which is incredibly important for Gallia. And then finally, our Gallia-specific card is Xenagos the Reveler, which is 2 red-green for a 3 loyalty Planeswalker Xenagos. It can +1 to add X mana in any combination of red and or green to your mana pool, where X is the number of creatures you control. Great for Gallia, great for a couple of our other commanders as well. But it can also 0 to put a 2/2 red and green satyr creature token with haste onto the battlefield. And we'll probably never quite get to the ultimate, but if we do, we exile the top 7 cards of our library and may put any number of creature cards and or land cards from among them onto the battlefield. So very unlikely we'll hit that ultimate. Really, Xenagos is here to make satyrs, because just being able to make a free 2/2 every single turn, especially a free 2/2 with haste, very important, very relevant. So Xenagos puts in work for Gallia there. And then our final 2-color commander is going to be Katilda Dawnheart Prime, which is green and a white for a 1/1 human warlock. She has protection from werewolves. Not going to be super relevant most of the time, but there's always the chance. And she also gives human creatures we control tap, add 1 mana of any of this creature's colors, and we can pay 6 and tap to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So with Katilda in the quote-unquote command zone, we have our 5 cards here. We have Rampant Growth as our ramp. We have Armorcraft Judge as our card draw. Because Armorcraft Judge enters the battlefield, we draw a card for each creature with a +1/+1 counter on it. And since Katilda puts +1/+1 counters on all of our creatures, that could draw us quite a few cards. Our Sunforgeable instant is Unbreakable Formation, again being protection, but can also put +1/+1 counters on our creatures if we cast it in our main phase, so again working very well with what Katilda wants to do. Our removal is Devout Chaplain, which can tap untapped humans to exile artifacts or enchantments, which doesn't sound very powerful up front, but it's incredibly useful when you think about the fact that it specifically exiles an artifact or enchantment. That's not a common thing to get, so to be able to have a repeatable exile effect on the board, that's perfect. That's exactly what we want to do. And then last but not least, we have Tauren's Fist of the Angels, a relatively new card from Crimson Vow that makes a 1/1 human token every single time we cast a creature spell. So we're able to pump up a ton of humans, use those humans for mana with Katilda, cast more humans, and just kind of keep the ball rolling. So our little Katilda package focuses mainly on +1/+1 counters and humans, and all of these cards work pretty well with those themes, except for Rampant Growth, which is just a good ramp spell. So now we're getting into our triple-colored commanders, and the first of those is going to be Jared Carthalion True Heir, and Jared is red, green, white for a 3/3 human warrior. When Jared Carthalion True Heir enters the battlefield, target opponent becomes the monarch. You can't become the monarch this turn. If damage would be dealt to Jared Carthalion while you're the monarch, prevent that damage and put that many +1/+1 counters on it. So again, we're seeing that +1/+1 counter theme. He's a human, plays well with the rest of our deck. And specifically what we're doing with Jared is trying to become the monarch. So our ramp spell is Court of Bounty, which lets us put a land into play on our upkeep, but also lets us become the monarch. Emberwild Captain is our card draw, because again, just becoming the monarch in itself is card draw, but it also kind of helps us protect ourselves a bit. And then we have Gideon's Sacrifice as our Sunforgeable instant, which looks a little bit weird, but keep in mind that while we're the monarch, any damage that would be dealt to Jared is prevented and he gets that many +1/+1 counters. So if our opponents attack us for a ton of damage, we can just cast Gideon's Sacrifice, choose Jared, and then all damage that would be dealt this turn to us or permanents we control is dealt specifically to Jared, meaning that we keep the monarchy and Jared gets massive because we probably were going to be dealt a ton of damage and now we're not. That also leads us into the specific Jared card, Pariah, which does the same thing that Gideon's Sacrifice does. It prevents all damage done to us and sends it to Jared instead, but it's an enchantment, so it's easier to remove, but it's also permanent, so it kind of has those trade-offs. And then finally, our removal is Court of Ire, again giving us the monarchy, and then doing either 2 or 7 damage to our opponents or to our opponent's creatures, as long as we either are the monarch for the 7 damage, or are not the monarch for the 2 damage. All right, so our next commander is one of my personal favorite creatures. It's Marisi, Breaker of the Coil. 1 red, green, white for a 5/4 cat warrior. And Marisi says your opponents can't cast spells during combat. Awesome. And whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, goad each creature that player controls. So we are able to kind of sneak in with 1 or 2 creatures and then goad our entire opponent's board. And then ideally, they'll tap out all of their creatures, and then we're able to attack them again and just kind of keep that going. So our mini Marisi deck includes Kodama's Reach for the ramp, card draw in Toski, Bearer of Secrets, because we want to be able to do damage to our opponents. Our Sun Forgeable instant is Naya Charm, giving us some removal or some recursion, tapping all creatures target player controls so we can get in for attacks. Incredibly useful with Marisi. Our removal spell for Marisi is Crossing Grip, the split second spell, so as long as it's on the stack, our opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities. And then finally, our Marisi exclusive is Soltari Visionary, which is 1 white for a cleric, and it has Shadow, which means that it can block or be blocked only by creatures with Shadow. And if Soltari Visionary damages any player, destroy target enchantment that player controls. So we're able to kind of sneak in with this 2/2 that nobody can block, and as long as Marisi's on board, we can goad every single creature that player controls. And then as an added bonus, we also get to destroy an enchantment that player controls. So Soltari Visionary, perfect for a Marisi deck, which is obviously why it makes it into our top 5 Marisi cards for this. And finally, saving possibly the best for last, we have Obuun, Moldaya Ancestor, which is one of the biggest win conditions in this deck. He is 1 red, green, white for a 3/3 elf spirit. And he says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, up to 1 target land you control becomes an XX elemental creature with trample and haste until end of turn, where X is Obuun's power, and it's still a land. And he also has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Since all of our mini commander decks have some form of ramp in them, Obuun can become incredibly powerful by just turning our lands into creatures and also putting +1/+1 counters on creatures we control. So our 5 cards for Obuun in this case, our ramp is Harrow, letting us sacrifice a land, put 2 more into play. Our card draw is Return of the Wild Speaker, because there's a very good chance that we're going to have a massive creature in Obuun or possibly something else. Our Sun Forgeable instant is Crush Contraband, exiling an artifact or enchantment. Removal is on a landfall creature, an Admonition Angel, so being able to play a land, exile a creature until the angel leaves play. And then finally, the Obuun specific is Felidar Retreat, which is an all-star in any Lands Matters deck. It's 3 and a white for an enchantment with landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, choose 1. Create a 2/2 white cat beast creature token, or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain vigilance until the end of turn. Being able to make tokens, great, but really being able to put counters on every single creature we control plays well with almost all of our other commanders. So Felidar Retreat is not just an all-star in Obuun, it's an all-star in the overall deck itself. But those are our 10 commanders, and I know this is a crazy deck. I'm trying something that probably isn't going to work super well, but honestly, it's a ton of fun, and it was super sweet to design trios of commanders that played well with our actual legal commanders in Ardenn and Tana. So that is the deck itself. I'm not going to go into themes and cool synergies in the deck because that kind of gets back into a lot of the cards we've already talked about. So instead, we're going to jump right to the end of our deck tech and talk about the price of the deck. And this deck actually came in pretty cheap. It was $71.63, with a good portion of that coming from Toski, who is $7.34. And so if you're looking to trim down on the price a little bit of this deck, cutting Toski and replacing it with another green card draw spell, something like Harmonize maybe, can drop the deck closer to about $63, $64. So definitely something to think about if you're looking to trim a little bit here and there, but if you can keep Toski, or if you have a copy that you want to put him into a deck, Toski is an amazing card draw engine. He's indestructible, can't be countered, so there's not much your opponents can do to deal with it besides exiling it. So if you have one, it's a great card draw spell, especially in mono green or Naya in this case. But that is the deck overall. I appreciate everybody coming with me for that crazy ride through our 10 separate commanders. But obviously, I can't just leave you hanging there. We can't just talk about a commander and then not see it in action. So we are going to run this deck into a game. We're going to run up against 3 opponents this week. We have Lena playing her Sisters of the Undead deck, which is actually Olivia Crimson Bride. And this is a vampire tribal deck. It's actually the recent Crimson Vow vampire tribal pre-constructed commander deck almost entirely. The only difference is that it has Olivia in the command zone. Next up, we have Bilal playing his Osgir the Reconstructor deck. This is an artifact-heavy deck. He wants to put some very powerful artifacts into his graveyard, reanimate them, and kind of run away with the game just through the use of value alone. And then finally, we have Nina, who is playing her Gisa and Geralf deck. This is her newest deck. It is a zombie tribal deck that wants to kind of use its own creatures for value, sacrifice them, get them back, and just generally run over her opponents with zombies. So I'm very excited to see how this game goes. I'm looking forward to see our 10 commander experiment in action. And if you have any suggestions for ways we could have improved this deck, or just suggestions for future videos in general, please do let me know. But other than that, I will talk to you guys after the game, and I hope you enjoy it. At the start of the game, Lena goes first, followed by myself, Bilal, and Nina. Before the game starts, Bilal is able to begin with Gemstone Caverns in play, with a luck counter on it so it can tap for a mana of any color. To do this, he exiles Sculpting Steel from his hand. Then, Lena plays a swamp, I play a Temple of Plenty, scrying 1, Bilal plays a command tower, Nina plays an island, Lena plays a swamp and casts Cordial Vampire, which puts a +1/+1 counter on each vampire she controls whenever any creature dies. On my turn, I play a Plains and cast our first commander, Katilda Dawnheart Prime, which allows all my humans to tap for a mana of any color. Bilal plays a Plains, Nina plays a Swamp, and casts Larder Zombie, which can tap 3 creatures to surveil 1. Lena plays an Exotic Orchard, and casts Commander Sphere before moving to combat and attacking Bilal for 1. I play a Mountain, and then cast a Soul Ring, followed up by Moss Diamond. And then I cast our second commander of the game, Mavinda Student's Advocate, which allows me to cast an instant or sorcery out of my graveyard once a turn, but it costs 8 more if it doesn't target one of my creatures. On Bilal's turn, he plays a Mountain, and casts his commander, Osgir the Reconstructor, which can exile an artifact from his graveyard and create 2 token copies of it. Nina plays a Swamp, and then casts Sepulchre Ghoul, which can sacrifice a creature to give itself +2/+2 once a turn. Lena plays a Swamp, and casts Rakish Air, which puts a +1/+1 counter on a vampire whenever it does combat damage to a player. I play a Plains, and cast Eliwick Tumblestrum, immediately activating her +1 ability to venture into the dungeon of the Mad Mage, gaining a life. Bilal plays a Mountain, and casts Wandering Archaic, allowing him to copy any instant or sorcery any opponent casts unless they pay 2 mana. He then moves to combat and attacks Eliwick for 4, knocking her down to 1 loyalty. On Nina's turn, she casts a Dark Steel Ingot and passes. Lena plays a command tower and attacks me for 1, and I allow it through with the deal that she doesn't attack me with the next creature she plays, which works out for me because when her Cordial Vampire does damage, she puts a +1/+1 counter on it, and then casts a Bloodlord of Vazgoth, which comes in with 3 +1/+1 counters since an opponent lost life this turn. She also casts a Falconwrath Gorger, which also comes in with 3 +1/+1 counters thanks to the Bloodlord, and also gives all of her vampires madness. On my turn, I activate Eliwic's +1 ability to venture into the dungeon, scrying 1, and I then cast a Court of Bounty, becoming the Monarch and allowing me to put a land or creature into play during my upkeep if I'm the Monarch, or just a land if I'm not. Then I cast one of my commanders from the command zone, Ardenn, Intrepid Archeologist, and at the end of turn I draw for being Monarch. Bilal plays a Plains and casts Mystic Forge, allowing him to look at and cast the top card of his library if it's colorless, and then he casts Chromatic Star from the top of his deck and sacrifices it to draw a card. He then activates Osgir to exile Chromatic Star from his graveyard and create 2 token copies of it. On Nina's turn, she plays a Swamp, and then casts a Hobbling Zombies, which makes a 2/2 zombie token with Decayed when it dies. Lena plays a Temple of the False God and casts Unstable Obelisk before moving to combat and attacking Nina for 6 in the air, putting another +1/+1 counter on the Bloodlord when it hits. In my upkeep, I put Irreverent Revelers into play since I'm still the Monarch, destroying Bilal's Mystic Forge when it enters. I then activate Eliwic's +1 ability, venturing into the dungeon and preventing Lena's Bloodlord from attacking until my next turn. After that, I cast Beast Whisperer, allowing me to draw a card whenever I cast a creature, and I follow that up by casting my other commander in the command zone, Tana the Bloodsower, drawing a card. Finally, I play a Boros Garrison, returning a Plains to my hand, and pass. Bilal plays a Plains, and moves to combat, attacking me for 4 with Osgir, becoming the Monarch. Then at the end of his turn, he draws for being the Monarch. Nina plays an island and casts her commander, Gisa and Geralf, milling 4 cards and being able to cast a zombie from her graveyard once a turn. She then moves to combat, attacking Bilal for 2, and since it has Death Touch, Bilal chooses to take the 2 damage, giving Nina the Monarchy, which she draws for at the end of her turn. Lena plays a mountain and attacks me for 5, and then in her second main phase, casts her commander, Olivia Crimson Bride. She then sacrifices Commander Sphere to draw a card, and casts Ancient Craving, drawing 3 more cards, losing 3 life. Since she doesn't pay the extra 2 for Wandering Archaic, Bilal also gets to draw 3 cards and lose 3 life. In my upkeep, I put a Naya Panorama into play with Court of Bounty, and then activate Eliwic's +1 ability to venture into the dungeon, scrying 2. I then play a Plains, and cast a Devout Chaplain, which can tap 2 humans to exile an artifact or enchantment, drawing a card with Beast Whisperer. After that, I cast Signal the Clans, paying 2 so Bilal can't copy it, to search my library for 3 creatures with different names and randomly putting 1 into my hand. I go for our 3-color commanders, revealing Jared, Carthalion True Heir, Marisi, Breaker of the Coil, and Obuun, Moldiah Ancestor. Then I randomly put Jared Carthalion into my hand, and once that resolves, Bilal casts Unexpected Windfall, discarding a card, drawing 2 cards, and making 2 treasure tokens. After that, I cast Jared Carthalion, choosing Nina to stay the Monarch when he enters, and then I pass. Bilal casts a Combustible Gearhulk, picking me when it enters, so I choose to either let him draw 3 cards or mill 3 cards and take damage equal to the milled card's mana value. Since Bilal wants things in his graveyard, I choose to let him draw 3. He then activates Osgir, exiling Mana Vault from his graveyard and creating 2 token copies of it. This allows him to cast all his dust, forcing each player to sacrifice all of their colored permanents, leaving only lands, mana rocks, and Bilal's Wandering Archaic. When Nina's Hobbling Zombie dies, though, she does create a 2/2 zombie token with Decayed. This doesn't stop Bilal from attacking her for 4, since it can't block, and becoming the Monarch, drawing for it at the end of his turn. On Nina's turn, she recasts her commander, Gissa and Geralf, milling 4 more cards, and then moves to combat, attacking Bilal for 2, reclaiming the Monarchy and sacrificing her Decayed Zombie after it attacks. Then she draws for Monarchy at the end of turn. Lena recasts her commander, Olivia, Crimson Bride, and casts Predator's Hour, allowing her to exile the top card of an opponent's library when she hits them with her creatures this turn, and cast that card for as long as it remains exiled. She then attacks me for 3 with Olivia, returning Bloodlord of Vazgoth from her graveyard tapped and attacking Nina, taking the Monarchy and drawing for it at the end of turn. Unfortunately though, we immediately forgot about Predator's Hour, so we don't trigger that ability. On my turn, I play a Jungle Shrine, and cast Open the Armory, paying 2 for Wandering Archaic, and searching my library for Sunforger, putting it into my hand. I then cast Sunforger, and sacrifice Naya Panorama to search my library and put a Forest into play tapped. At the end of my turn, Bilal sacrifices both Chromatic Stars to draw 2 cards. In Bilal's upkeep, he loses 2 life since his mana vaults are still tapped, and in his first main phase, he casts Daretti Scrap Savant, followed up by Oswald Fiddlebender, and also a Diamond Lion. He then activates Daretti's +2 ability, discarding 2 cards and drawing 2 cards. On Nina's turn, she plays an island and casts Falcon Abomination before attacking Lena for 4 with Gissa and Geralf. In her second main phase, she casts a Fleshbag Marauder, making each player sacrifice a creature. This kills the Falcon Abomination, Oswald Fiddlebender, and the Bloodlord of Vazgoth. On Lena's turn, she moves straight to combat, attacking Bilal for 3, triggering Olivia and returning Bloodlord of Vazgoth to the battlefield, which is attacking me. In her second main phase, she casts Vampire Nighthawk, putting 3 +1/+1 counters on it thanks to the Bloodlord's ability, and also casts Charcoal Diamond, and then finally Loreen the Diversion, searching her library to put Camber the Plunderer to hand and allowing her to sacrifice artifacts or creatures to goad another target creature. On my turn, I play a Temple of Abandon, scrying 1, and recast my commander Ardenn before moving to combat, triggering Ardenn and equipping Sunforger to him for free. In Bilal's upkeep, he pays 8 mana to untap both of his mana vaults, and then plays an Urza's Mine as his land for turn, and activates Daretti's +2 ability to discard 2 cards and draw 2 cards. On Nina's turn, she casts Bone Splinters, sacrificing Fleshbag Marauder to destroy Lena's Vampire Nighthawk. This allows her to attack Lena for 4 with Gissa and Geralf, but she blocks with Loreen, killing the rogue. In Nina's second main phase, she recasts Falcon Abomination from the graveyard, this time remembering to create a 2/2 zombie token with Decayed when it enters. Then, at the end of turn, Nina draws for being the Monarch. Lena casts a Bloodsworn Steward, giving Olivia +2/+2 in haste, and then casts Camber the Plunderer, creating a blood token and gaining a life whenever an opponent's creature dies. She then attacks Bilal for 3 with the Bloodlord, and me for 3 with Olivia, triggering her and returning Vampire Nighthawk to play, tapped and attacking Nina. Nina blocks with the Falcon, and then Bilal and I both take 3, while Lena gains 2. We also all agree as a table that Lena played her creatures after combat, so they get the extra 3 +1/+1 counters from the Bloodlord. And then, at the end of turn, I activate my Sunforger, unequipping it from Ardenn to search my library for a red or white instant, mana value 4 or less, and cast it for free. This lets me cast Naya Charm, paying 2 mana for Wandering Archaic, to return Mavinda from my graveyard to my hand. On my turn, I recast Mavinda, Student's Advocate, and then play a Selesnya Sanctuary, returning a Plains to my hand, before moving to combat, triggering Ardenn, and equipping Sunforger to Mavinda for free. Bilal plays a Plains, and recasts his commander Osgir, and then casts Commander Sphere, immediately sacrificing it to draw a card, and then activates Duretti's +2 ability to discard 1 card and draw 1 card. Nina plays a Swamp, and casts Lear, Disciple of the Drowned, making all spells uncounterable and giving all instants and sorceries in Nina's graveyard flashback. She then casts Bone Shards with flashback, sacrificing her Decayed Zombie to destroy Wandering Archaic. Since she doesn't pay 2, Bilal gets to copy it without sacrificing a creature and tries to destroy Mavinda. In response, I activate Sunforger, unequipping it and searching my library for Wild Ricochet, casting it for free, but paying 2 for the Wandering Archaic. This lets me copy Bilal's copy of Bone Shards and redirect his original copy. With that, I'm able to destroy Osgir and Bloodsworn Steward, instead saving my Mavinda. Lena plays a Swamp and casts Midnight Arsonist, destroying up to 6 artifacts without mana abilities since she controls 6 vampires. Unfortunately for me, the only artifact on the board without a mana ability is Sunforger. So in response, I cast Chaos Warp on my own Sunforger to shuffle it into my deck and reveal the top card, putting it into play if it's a permanent. This has me revealing Fire Diamond, putting it into play. After that, Lena casts Damnable Pact, drawing 3 cards and losing 3 life. Then she casts a Soul Ring and moves to combat, attacking me for 3 with Olivia, Nina for 2 with the Nighthawk, and Bilal for 3 with the Bloodlord. On attacks, Olivia triggers, returning Bloodsworn Stewards to play, also attacking Nina. This results in Nina taking 6, Bilal taking 3, me taking 5, Lena gaining 2, and becoming the Monarch. On my turn, I play an Evolving Wilds, immediately sacrificing it to search my library for a forest and put it into play tapped. Then I cast Open the Armory out of my graveyard with Mavinda, but it does cost 8 more mana since it doesn't target any of my creatures. But this does let me search my library for Sunforger, again putting it to hand, and allowing me to cast it, moving to combat and equipping it for free onto Ardenn. On Bilal's turn, he casts Pirate's Pillage, discarding a card, drawing 2 cards, and making a treasure token. He then plays a Temple of the False Gods, and casts Shatter the Sky to destroy all creatures, and also drawing me, Lena, and Nina all a card, since we control a creature power 4 or greater. He follows that up by casting Oblivion Stone, which can be activated to put a Fate counter on target permanent, or can be sacrificed to destroy all non-land permanents without Fate counters on them. He then activates Duretti's -2 ability to sacrifice a treasure, and this allows him to return Darksteel Forge to play, making all his artifacts indestructible. On Nina's turn, she plays a Rogue's Passage, and then casts a Ragged Recluse. Lena recasts her commander Olivia, and casts Sanctum Seeker, which drains each opponent for 1 whenever she attacks with a vampire, and then she attacks Nina with Olivia, draining each opponent for 1, and returning Bloodsworn Vampire to the battlefield, attacking Bilal. Then Nina ends up taking 5, while Bilal takes 4. On my turn, I play a Plains, and recast my commander Ardenn, moving to combat and automatically equipping Sunforger. But before the ability can resolve, Bilal sacrifices Oblivion Stone to destroy all non-land permanents, but since his artifacts are all indestructible, he gets to keep all of his while the rest of us lose everything. After that, my second main phase, I cast Cultivate to search my library for 2 basic lands, putting one into play tapped and the other into my hand. In Bilal's upkeep, he pays 8 to untap his 2 mana vaults, and then plays a Lorehold Campus, and casts a Karn Scion of Urza. He activates Karn's +1 ability to reveal the top 2 cards of his library, and I choose to have him put Worn Power Stone into his hand and exile Shimmermere with a silver counter on it. Nina recasts her commander, Gissa and Geralf, milling the top 4 cards of her library, and then recasts Sepulchre Ghoul from her graveyard. Lena casts Crossway Troublemakers, giving all her attacking creatures Death Touch and Lifelink, and also allowing her to pay 2 life whenever a vampire dies to draw a card. I play a forest and cast Tauren's Fist of the Angels, which creates a 1/1 human token with training whenever I cast a creature spell, and then I recast my commander Tana, creating a human token with Tauren's. Bilal plays Urza's Tower, and then activates Karn's -1 ability to put Shimmermere into his hand since it has a silver counter on it. He then recasts his commander Osgir and passes. Nina casts a Viscera Seer and immediately sacrifices it to Sepulchre Ghoul, giving it +2/+2 until end of turn. She then attacks me with both of her creatures for 8, and I decide to block Gissa and Geralf with my human token, killing it, and then I take 4 damage. In her second main phase, she casts an Arrogant Outlaw, gaining 2 life while all her opponents lose 2 life, since an opponent already lost life this turn. Lena plays a Swamp and recasts Olivia, moving to combat attacking Bilal. In response to her trigger, Bilal casts Shimmermere, giving all his artifacts flash, and then flashes in a Triplicate Titan. Then Olivia's trigger resolves, putting Bloodsworn Steward into play, also attacking Bilal. Bilal blocks Olivia, killing her and taking 4 damage, while Lena gains 9. Unfortunately here, we miss the fact that Bloodsworn Steward should have exiled itself when Olivia dies. And then, when Olivia dies, Lena pays 2 life with Crossroads Troublemakers, drawing a card. On my turn, I play a Plains and recast Ardenn yet again, making another human token. In Bilal's upkeep, he pays 8 mana to untap his mana vaults, and then plays a mountain and casts Goblin Engineer. This lets him search his library for a Platinum Angel, putting it into his graveyard. After that, he activates Osgir, exiling the Platinum Angel from his graveyard to create 2 token copies of it, making it so that he can't lose the game and his opponents can't win the game. He then attacks Lena for 9 with Triplicate Titan, taking the Monarchy and drawing for it at the end of turn. Nina casts a Fairy Vandal, which gets a +1/+1 counter when she draws her second card each turn, and then sacrifices her Arrogant Outlaw to give Sepulchre Ghoul +2/+2 until end of turn, and activates Rogue's Passage to make Sepulchre Ghoul unblockable. She then attacks Bilal for 4, reclaiming the Monarchy, and in her second main phase, she recasts her Falcon Abomination from the graveyard, creating a 2/2 Decayed Zombie token. She then draws for Monarchy at the end of turn, and puts a +1/+1 counter on her Fairy Vandal. Lena plays a Swamp, and then casts Arcane Signet, followed by a Markov Enforcer, fighting Gissa and Geralf, killing them and making Lena a blood token. She then casts Champion of Dusk, drawing 4 cards and losing 4 life when it enters, since she controls 4 vampires. Moving to combat, she attacks Nina for 4 in the air, trying to become the Monarch, but Nina blocks with her Falcon Abomination, killing it while Lena gains 4 life. On my turn, I play a Mountain and pass, because I am flooding out at this point in the game. In Bilal's upkeep, he takes 2 damage from his tapped mana vaults, and then casts Mask of Memory, immediately equipping it to Triplicate Titan, allowing him to draw 2 cards and discard a card when the Titan does damage to an opponent. He then casts a Sensei's Divining Top and activates it to look at the top 3 cards of his library and put them back in any order. After that, he moves to combat, attacking me for 9, drawing 2 cards and discarding 1 when it hits me. And in his second main phase, he activates Osgear to exile Combustible Gearhulk from his graveyard, creating 2 token copies, and I let him draw 6 cards rather than mill him and have him do damage to me. Then he plays a Mountain and activates Karn's +1 ability, and I have him put Chromatic Sphere into his hand and exile Zerda the Dawnwaker with a silver counter on it. He then casts and sacrifices Chromatic Sphere to draw a card, and passes. Nina plays a Swamp and recasts her commander, Gissa and Geralf, milling 4 more, and then casts Lantern Bearer, drawing from Monarch at the end of turn. Lena plays a Mountain and recasts Olivia yet again, moving to combat and attacking Nina for 5 with Olivia to reclaim the Monarchy, and this also triggers her commander, returning Vampire Nighthawk to play, also attacking Nina. Then Nina takes 7, Lena gains 7, and draws for Monarch at the end of turn. On my turn, I attack Lena for 1 to take the Monarchy and attempt to find an answer to Bilal's board. Unfortunately, when I draw at the end of turn, it's not helpful, so we all decide to concede, not seeing a way we're going to exile 2 Platinum Angels, winning Bilal the game. Alright, so that was a wild game. By the end of it, Bilal had pretty much locked down the rest of us, so we did all decide to scoop. I'm sure we could have played it out, but I don't think there was much we could do. I was going to die on Bilal's next turn, because being the white player, I was the only one who could really exile his artifacts. I don't think the Dimir or Rakdos players had much of a hope of exiling artifacts, so once I was gone, there wasn't much the rest of the table could do, so we kind of decided to scoop it up at that point, especially because the game had actually been going on for about 2.5 hours at that point, so we were all getting pretty tired. But I do think everyone's deck put up a good showing. Nina, for the first time playing her Gissa and Geralf deck, it definitely recurred a lot of things, got a lot of value, being able to make decayed zombie tokens and being able to just keep recasting things out of her graveyard. Lena's vampire deck, as always, very terrifying. Even though a precon, it's still got quite a bit of power, especially with Olivia in the command zone reanimating things. And then our deck did some pretty sweet things. It's unfortunate that we lost our Sunforger when we did, because we did have ways to exile artifacts in the deck. We just couldn't get there. But it was pretty cool to be able to protect ourselves with Sunforger, and especially being able to wild ricochet the bone shards and destroy 3 things instead of our things was pretty sweet. And of course, Bilal's deck ran very well, being able to get exactly what he needed, having the 2 mana vaults for most of the game to kind of let him run away with it. And of course, the 2 Platinum Angels that were indestructible at the end really put a damper on the rest of the table, since we couldn't do much about it. But a very good game, very happy to have participated in it, and very happy with how our deck performed overall, especially considering it was 10 mini decks just kind of mashed together. So thank you to everybody for watching and for joining us on this wild ride of a commander deck. But I hope everybody did enjoy it, and like I said before, please do give me suggestions for ways to improve the deck or comments for future videos. But thank you for 50 episodes of the Commanders Guild. Hopefully we'll have 50 more, and I can't believe it's already been almost a year since we've been doing weekly videos. So thank you again, but I'll see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.
I'll play Plains.
Oh my god.
How's it go?
You okay?
There's a stink bug on the lizard.
Get it off then.
Oh no.
I can't.
Okay, I'm coming.
What the?
It's a stink bug. It's